It's daybreak here on the Rise News. Time for the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they coming. We begin with our sister publication This Day. Leading headline this morning: we must succeed by all means. That's from President Tinubu. Some writers there: 6 National Assemblies nod to borrow $7.8 billion and 100 million euro external loans. Vows not to spare any resources in bid to turn nation around. This was at the opening of a 3-day retreat organized for ministers, presidential aides, permanent secretaries, and top government officials. Perform or be sacked. That's what the president says to the ministers and advisors. Meanwhile, the British High Commissioner hails federal government's reforms. World Bank's commitment in Nigeria since 2020 is over $11 billion. That's from the World Bank country director. The leading photo there you cannot miss on the front page of This Day with the caption, "Workers' President Brutalized." That's the NLC President Joe Ajaro, who was arrested and allegedly brutalized by police in Imo for leading protests against the state government over lack of respect for workers, unpaid salaries and pensions, amongst others. And that's the headline at the top right there. NLC, TUC and police trade words over alleged abduction, brutalization of Ajaro in Imo. Labour now threatens a nationwide strike. Meanwhile, the police says we took him into protective custody. We have no hand in Ajaro's arrest, Imo government declares. Meanwhile, NLC president regains freedom, is now receiving treatment at the Federal Medical Center in Owerri. NUPRC summons crude producer, says local refineries must get supply before export. And in Rivers State, the court restrains the State Assembly from impeaching the governor, Sim Fubara, as police arrest and drag governor supporters to court. Meanwhile, the former governor, Wike, warns detractors and says he cannot be intimidated. He also says, "I will do what I want to do," and declares impeachment is constitutional and not a coup. That's This Day this morning.
The Punch has traders lamenting as a fire destroys 300 shops in Lagos market. The pictures there for you as firefighters try to stop or take out that fire. But the leading story for the Punch this morning is that of the court stopping Fubara's removal. That's the governor of Rivers State. And PDP governors consult Wike. Nobody can intimidate me. Impeachment not a coup. FCT minister insists. Crisis will be resolved, says Fubara. PDP governors plan Port Harcourt meeting. Well, above the masthead this morning, crude shortage delays, Dangote refinery, 5 others take off. And Tinubu seeks $7.8 billion as well as 100 million euro fresh loans. Let's go to other stories that made it to the front page of the Punch this morning. Reps probe 200 billion naira spent on postponed census. And tax-seeking gunmen kill 40 in Yobe attacks. Tragic. The Punch for you.
The Guardian Nigeria this morning. Its big story: red flag on domestic borrowings as Tinubu considers a 30 trillion naira fresh loans. The infographics there showing African governments who are facing debt crisis as global monetary tightening makes refinancing costly, leaving many of them in dire straits. It shows from the most vulnerable to the least vulnerable, with Egypt, Ghana, Zambia being the most vulnerable. Nigeria tags behind Ghana. Also, more African governments are now relying on central bank overdrafts. And here in Nigeria, the government may resort to CBN's overdraft as local and foreign markets dry up. If you want more on that, pick up a copy of The Guardian. More stories from The Guardian. Let's see. President Tinubu vows to sack non-performing ministers, seeks approval to borrow $7.86 billion and 100 million euros. NLC president arrested, brutalized in Imo, lands in hospital. Emefiele, prosecute, don't enter into plea bargain. That's The Guardian, Nigeria.
Well, the Tribune, here's how they're reporting the Rivers crisis this morning. Wike opens up on Rivers crisis. Says nobody can take away our political structure. Impeachment is provided for in the Constitution. Interesting. Well, Fubara gets court nod. Restraining House on impeachment. Says nothing wrong if father and son have issues. This father and son fights we see quite often in Nigerian politics. And the picture on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune is that of the Nigerian Labour Union President, Joe Ajero. In one picture, he has a neck collar. In the other, you can see he's been brutalized and his eyes are swollen. Labour talks tough over brutalization arrest of NLC president in Imo, says the story. Wants Tinubu to call Uzodinma to order. Ajero was in protective custody, not arrested, says the Nigeria police. Well, I must succeed by all means, Tinubu says. You can find that above the masthead. And reps issues 72-hour ultimatum to the Attorney General of the Federation to submit report on 100 billion naira COVID-19 intervention fund. It's a busy front page for the Nigerian Tribune. Let's see if we can take two more stories. The OAU, that's the Obafemi Awolowo University students, storm the anti-graft EFCC over arrest of 69 of their colleagues. And lifting forex ban on restricted items was spelled doom for poultry industry, says the association.
The Daily Sun this morning leading with President Tinubu as he threatens to sack ministers. He says non-performing officials will go. Sets up results delivery unit headed by Hadiza Bala. World Bank says it's time for Nigeria to rise to its potential. The leading photo there was at the opening of a 3-day retreat organized for ministers, presidential aides, permanent secretaries, and other top government officials, where President Tinubu made that statement. Rivers crisis, Fubara under fire as stakeholders back Wike, ask government to deny insinuations and allegations against FCT minister. Fubara says nothing wrong with father-son disagreement. Meanwhile, reps to probe 200 billion naira expenditure on postponed 2023 census. Presidency to spend 28 billion naira on SUVs, renovation of Tinubu's quarters and others, as the president seeks Senate approval of 2022-2024 external borrowing plan of $7.8 billion and 100 million pounds. Appeal court sacks Suswam from Senate. Moro wins, also affirms Ned Woko and others in Delta and Kogi State. Just beside the nameplate of the Daily Sun this morning, in Imo, police NLC disagree over Ajaro's arrest. Meanwhile, union members allege their president was bruised and manhandled.
Well, let's look at the Daily Trust. It's drawing attention to the spendings by the presidency. It says anger over planned 7 billion naira renovation of Tinubu Shetima's residences. The writers to that story: First Lady vehicles to gap 1.5 billion naira. Citizens, Labour Party, civil society organizations kick. President seeks National Assembly nod to borrow $7.8 billion, 100 million euros.
Some international papers this morning. The Independent has a special investigation. As you can see from the photo there, it says Afghan special forces betrayed by Britain. They fought for us. We promised them refuge. We abandoned them to be hunted, tortured, and murdered by the Taliban. Why? Those are officers in elite triples units who spent years fighting with British troops, but the UK left them for dead after withdrawing from Afghanistan. That's a special investigation by The Independent. And just below that, Boris's number 10 was toxic. That's the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Sexist and devoid of humanity. Top civil servants say officials laughed at Italians dying at the start of the pandemic. Meanwhile, she couldn't recall a single day COVID rules were followed in Downing Street. Also, the PM did nothing to stop Dominic Cummings' misogynist rant to handcuff her. And just above there, Britons are among the 320 foreign nationals allowed to leave Gaza as the first evacuees begin to leave Gaza. That's The Independent.
Well, many of the papers lead with the news that a number of injured people and foreign passport holders have been allowed to leave Gaza Strip. If we have the Times. Great. Including the Times reporting that some diplomats have suggested that up to 7,500 people could be allowed to leave Gaza in the coming weeks. But it does report as its major story, first Britons are allowed to flee Gaza into Egypt.
The Financial Times this morning also leading with the Gaza crisis, as Egypt lets in first evacuees. Also, the head of the UN Agency for Palestinians, the most senior official allowed into Gaza since the war began, says his agency is running out of fuel, food, water, and medicine. More headlines from the Financial Times. Fed keeps rate at 22-year high as investors bet on Bank of England following suit. U.S. economy grows at strong pace. There's optimism in inflation battle as door open to further tightening. At the bottom there, U.S. Institute on AI Artificial Intelligence Safety upstages Rishi Sunak's push to shape global rules.
The Eye also chooses to focus on the situation in Gaza after 400 people were allowed to leave the Strip, including British nationals. A Gaza border with Egypt opened after 26 days of war, with 335 foreign passport holders and 76 seriously injured Gazans able to leave so far, and that's according to Palestinian officials. The picture tells the story.
The Guardian UK leads with a photo of a boy crying as he's carried to an ambulance to be taken to Egypt for treatment as the Rafah crossing opens for limited evacuation. More headlines from the Guardian UK. Pandemic hit brain health of over 50s. Study finds there's cognitive decline sped up regardless of whether people had caught COVID. Also, lack of number 10 diversity led to women's death. That's a report from the Guardian UK.
Well, the Daily Mirror, if we have the Daily Mirror, and if we don't, well, that's the press review. This morning, let's hear your views on all the burning issues. You can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, @AriseTV.